Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to PAVE's discussion. My name is Tabitha Coulter, and I'm PAVE's Director of Operations and the moderator for today's panel. This is our second in a special Back to School September series that PAVE is conducting, where we're trying to highlight unique approaches to AV education. Our goal is that these lessons on education about automated vehicle technology will resonate with students and adults at any level and really help encourage conversations on how to bring more people into the fold on this important technology. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to our guest for today, Selika Josiah Talbott of American University. Selika and I have known each other for a few months now since she joined our PAVE Academic Advisory Council, and I leave every conversation with her freshly inspired. So that's a feeling I'm thrilled that we get to share with you all today. Selika, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I'm going to give just a quick bio of you, Selika, so everybody knows a little about your background and how that influences the direction you're going to take in those topics.
Sure.
So Professor Talbott is currently at American University's School of Public Affairs, where she's researching autonomous vehicle policy, impacts on governments, OEMs, and regulatory stakeholder communities. She has written and spoken about public policy regarding transportation and innovation, as well as provided strategic assistance for transportation associations and companies. She has 18 years of experience as an attorney and formerly served as the Deputy Administrator for the State of New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission. Did I miss anything?
I know it's a lot in there. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, so to kick off our conversation today, I really wanted to start with just kind of the most basic question, which is, why is it important to get people from all backgrounds excited about AVs?
And my answer would simply be, why not? Everything about AVs is impactful on our lives, whether you're the suburban mom, the rural grandparent, or the city slicker who needs to get to work, to have good access to healthcare, to obtain food, for upward mobility in your jobs, and a host of other issues and problems. AVs can solve them. So why should we be excited? Why should we have these discussions? Because AVs will change your life.
Absolutely. So, what are some of the techniques that you use when you try to get people excited to learn about AVs? As an educator especially, why is it so important to get people excited from the beginning, and how do we kind of make those connections you were talking about between their life and how it can affect them?
Well, I think public engagement is critical. I use an example when I talk about if a new development was going to come to your town, and you have a developer who says, I want to build 200 houses here, and the town says, we don't need any more homes and our schools are crowded. And the developer says, well, I think you do need the homes and I'll build you a new school. And the town says, that sounds really good, but we don't have any place for those kids to play if you do build this 200 unit development. And the builder says, well, I tell you what, I'll build a couple of parks. And the town expresses a concern about trees and the environment. And the builder says, we will make sure that there are trees in the community and that we shrub and we keep the natural footprint of the community. And then the community says yes, because there's something in it for them. That's what autonomous vehicles are for us. We want to get excited and energized because we know it's coming, but what's in it for us? How can we impact what autonomous vehicles will do for our communities? How can we ensure that it'll make things better for us? That's why we want to get excited and involved at such an early age.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of reminds me, you told me once in a conversation we had about a class that you had been planning on the future of transportation that was based on the Jetsons. And that's just something that I love, that idea of, combining that pop culture with it. So I was just curious, with that example, like, where did that idea come from? And what are you hoping to accomplish when you kind of bring those pop culture references to this experience with people?
Absolutely. So it's a longer story, but I'm still going to give it because I think it's germane to the conversation.
Okay.
I can't say that it started with me. I heard Professor Elaine Kornhauser at Princeton University, when I was the deputy administrator in New Jersey, talk about autonomous vehicles and he had a slide with the Jetsons on it and that flying car. And it resonated with me. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, our schedules are changed, and I won't be teaching that course this fall, but hopefully it'll be taught in the spring. But the point behind the Jetsons and using that as a model to pull people in is one, I will acknowledge having been around when the Jetsons cartoons were airing on television. And I was excited about these outlandish and pie in the sky notions of a self-driving vehicle. But if we were to watch the Jetsons today, which is what I would have my students do, they'll notice that their smartwatches, the Jetsons really had smartwatches back then. They'll notice robot vacuums, and they'll see video conferencing. In our age of Zoom, they were doing it back in the 50s on the Jeffersons. So what we take away from that is, back in the 50s, they saw this as issues of the day, and they had outlandish resolution and solution, things that they thought were just cartoon land, but have actually come to reality. That's what I want to use as a baseline for students to say, what are the problems of today? Using this as a baseline, think about the craziest thing that you could imagine, and now solve that problem.
Absolutely. So, I get the sense that you kind of take these exciting pop culture references, or the Jetsons and stuff, and like you use that to leverage that excitement in AVs, and then you use that as a springboard to get onto other topics. So kind of what do you do once you get those students interested in that conversation? Is it, it's not just teaching people the nuts and bolts of how AVs work, and what's kind of that broader goal that you are trying to get to?
So the broader goal is really to listen. So in education, we think sometimes that as academics, we're just giving in the classroom, but we should be receiving also. Our students have a voice, and they have concerns that they want to share with us. They have ideas that are resonating with them, and they see problems. And if we listen, we can work together to get to those pathways and those solutions. So I want to spark the interest. I want to let people see what the possibility is, and then work with them on discrete issues to say, how can we solve these issues? And frankly, especially being in the policy field, how are our rules and regulations impactful on the problems that we face today and the solutions of tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. I know, from reading your other work and your Forbes articles and seeing you talk in other panels, one of those big kind of discrete issues that you like to talk about a lot is the political economy in mobility and transportation. So I was curious if you could kind of start us off by defining that and sort of why it's so important for people to understand that concept to then apply it to AVs and their potential impacts.
Absolutely. So I've coined this phrase, the political economy of autonomous vehicles. And so everything we do in society has a political or a governmental reach. And the economy piece is the value, whether it's economic or societal. And so the political economy of autonomous vehicles looks at that intersection between government and often revenue, or the impact on society. So for example, one of the things that I noticed is the concern about infrastructure. And what are we going to do about our roadways? And how are our laws going to adapt and change? And the policy pieces is really what I'm talking about. So in a city where you're getting, and I'll use Washington, D.C., and I'll use them because I think that they have started to really work hard towards figuring out autonomous vehicles. But in the today space, if they are receiving more than $320 million in revenue from parking and driving infractions.
Wow, that's a lot.
A lot of money. And we know that autonomous vehicles will be designed not to break the law. What happens? I'm not even going to say it's all going to go away, but even if 20 or 25% of that $320 million goes away, what does that city do to replace the revenue? Do they tax their citizens more? Is there the political will for that? Have they started to model other ways to make up those revenue losses? A lot of that has to do with public engagement, both at the community level, at the government level, and importantly, at the level of the elected. Because we know that our actions definitely have a reaction by those we've put in office. So if we don't like something as our citizenry and we come together collectively to push, enforce, encourage our political leaders to take action, that will happen. That's the intersection of the politics and the economy, so the political economy of autonomous vehicles.
That's so interesting. And I mean, I like the point you raised where, this is obviously something that happens in DC and in these bigger cities, but when you think about parking or red light ticket cameras, like that's something that's everywhere in the country. I mean, that affects every single person to some extent, and I'm sure some cities more than others.
So I'm working on a research paper that I'm actually in the final stages. This is my so-called summer project, where I look at some municipalities across the country, and some of them, 10 or more % of their revenue is coming from driving infractions. Wow. So you think that, we could look at it federally, but I will tell you, having been a deputy administrator of a state motor vehicle commission, really this is a state by state issue and even deeper into our localities, because states are setting laws and rules and regulations by which their drivers have to abide, and states will have to change that. Right now, it's as if it is an IV transfusion for states, because not only in many instances are you paying for your driving infraction, you're also paying an attendant court cost or court fee. So there is an incentive for a city to want you, in some instances, to break the law, because that pays the bread and butter for the support services in a city. We have to start shifting the paradigm and finding other ways to pay for those expenses that we have as communities, so that when autonomous vehicles are ready to be widespread, we don't have pushback from our elected officials.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think really helps kind of expand our perspective of where this is all, impacting people and where it could potentially impact people in the future as well. Which also got me thinking, I know another big field that you like to talk about is equity. So I'm just curious, how equity fits into these conversations. Is it a way just to get people interested and involved in these conversations, or is it part of a broader goal when we think about educating people on AVs or just transportation as a whole?
Well, I think it's all of those things. So first, for those who aren't interested in equity, I can say, even if it's not your thing, equity in transportation, and especially in autonomous vehicles, will likely help to push the widespread use. And so I'll break it down. If I live in a community where there is limited access to food, but government provides the benefit for my food, I'm getting some government assistance. Government is supplying me with unhealthy food on a monthly basis because my options are limited. But what if government, taking those same dollars, injected them into the autonomous vehicle community and said, I will make sure that you can get your food on a monthly basis, but now I'm going to bring to you healthy food options that may lie outside of your community, or I'll bring you to the healthy food options. And so therefore you can take care of your family better. We know that there are a variety of issues that stem from lack of good food. You're able to solve those issues, but it's not just the city folk. I think very often when we think about equity, we instantly go to cities. And I can tell you, having lived in a rural, suburban, and in a city environment, these things are systemic across society. So I'll give an example. I work on a farm and we have extended family. My grandmother is on this farm with us, and we have one vehicle.
Right.
That vehicle is helping us to farm every day. That vehicle can't transport grandma to her dialysis, or even before that to regular maintenance checkups, because we live in a rural community and the nearest healthcare is 50 miles away. And it's almost a half a day or a day to make those trips. So then what's happening is grandma is only seen in urgent and or critical situations.
Yeah.
Again, what if autonomous vehicles has the opportunity to inject itself across the board in healthcare, where we're building in our expense of our healthcare, the transportation costs? It sounds astronomical when you first think about it, but in the reality, we would likely be significantly reducing the cost of healthcare by providing people much needed access to regular maintenance. When we think about those who are differently abled, it opens up a whole new world to people who are unable to drive on their own. And now they would have regular mobility when they want and where they want it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're nailing something that we at PAVE really believe in and see this huge opportunity for AV education. Whatever your situation, whatever your interests are, there's a good chance that they interact with AVs somewhere in your life, somewhere in your family, your extended family, like you're talking about. So once you get people to kind of see that connection, how do we then leverage that opportunity to kind of get them involved in those conversations once they make those connections?
Well, I still think that one of the things that we're missing here from an industry standpoint and a government standpoint are PSAs, public service announcements. I talked about in a recent panel earlier in COVID times, and I was walking on the streets of Washington, D.C., actually going to pick up a prescription. And across the road came this starship, clearly doing a remote delivery. And there was a dog and a little boy with his parents. The dog attempted for a half a second to do its business on the starship. Well, it was yanked away by its owner, and the little boy tried to kick it, and the parents laughed. No harm was done, but it could have been.
Yeah.
And those people who were seeing this little tiny robot ambulate across the roadway on Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C., didn't understand what it was they were seeing. The industry hasn't provided enough information. If I want to build in your community, the builder is required to send notice to the community. There are letters in everybody's mailbox that tells you, we want to build here. We want to put in a community here. We want to put in a pool. We're going to put in a parking lot, whatever. The builder is required to do that, but we have not asked that of people who are either testing or using autonomous vehicles on our roadways. It is not meant to put a bullseye on them. It is meant to bring the public along as we map and pilot and test, and in some instances, actually deploy autonomous vehicle services.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know too, you and I have had a conversation before about getting people to realize how this technology can benefit them, in that's a really important point in that public engagement. I think you had a metaphor once about taking your kids, getting them ready to go in the car.
So it's
yeah.
my Disney story.
Yeah.
And I can say to my children, hurry up, get ready, we're going in the car. Mm-hmm. And clearly, I'll just have this disclaimer because they might get upset. They're 24 and 21 now, so this was a long time ago. Hurry up and get ready to go in the car. And they kind of drag their feet because they don't want to go in the car. Mom's probably going to go to the mall and go shopping, and they really are not into that. Or I can say, Guess what? As soon as you clean up your room and pack your backpacks, we're going to get in the car and drive to the airport because we're going to Disneyland. A much different response. There's no shuffling of the feet. It's the fastest those rooms ever get cleaned up and those backpacks get packed. And they're at the door saying, come on, Mom, where are you? We're ready to go. It's that excitement. And if we start to explain to people, it's not just a cool idea. Autonomous vehicles is transformative. Your neighbor who now can't ambulate on their own because they have no transportation will be able to do that. We will extend people's lives because we will give them access to regular healthcare maintenance. For those who don't have access to better jobs in the communities that they live in, now you're going to have access to a better job, better employment, better upward mobility for your family. Autonomous vehicles is the game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. See, I'm feeling inspired already. Okay, so now let's say we have people excited, we have them engaged, they're interested. What's kind of the next step? What's your vision for that well-educated and engaged AV stakeholder? What should they know? What kind of resources should they be armed with? Sort of, where do we go from there?
So there was a time when we would have development and we would say, go read a book and go get your information from the internet. And there's Robot Take the Wheel is one of my favorite references because it really is imagining a whole new world. PAVE, I think that PAVE is providing a much needed resource to the community because it is the educational hub of autonomous vehicles. And if you want to know it and you want access to the information, you have it. But also for the public then to turn to their communities, their government, their legislators, and say what it is that they want autonomous vehicles to do for them.
Yeah.
I talked about when we want to listen to our students in the classroom, but we want to listen to the community. It's great for me to tell you what works for me in my community at my particular space and place in life, but I need to know what works for you and what works for my neighbor, so that as we are carving out new regulation and new policy, we make sure that it takes into account the real needs of the community. Too often planning groups and city planning agencies and these people aren't necessarily embedded in the community. They're driving in from their suburbs to their city job, not even utilizing the transportation for which they are making decisions about. Yeah. They have to pull more from the community so that they hear the voices of the community and understand what the community is asking for.
Absolutely. So thinking about those community, and one other element of that is the educators like you who are kind of having those conversations with people. What kind of advice would you give to other educators about how they can help shape the kinds of people who will go on to have those conversations, what they can be doing to help encourage that? Any advice you have just would be lovely.
I think that what I want to leave people with to some degree is this notion that autonomous vehicles is a technical thing. That if I am not in a artificial intelligence space, it's not for me. But we know that's not true. Autonomous vehicles will touch each and every part of our lives, so that what I would say to educators is we should have these conversations starting in elementary school. We should talk about transportation in elementary school. We have created and baked into our transportation systems currently inequities for almost every segment of society. When we're talking about the future of transportation and autonomous vehicles, we want to make sure that we're addressing those inequities. We want to make sure that we don't just think about cars. I love cars, I love cars, I love cars, but I'm passionate about freight, our trucks and our motor coach buses, and this multimodal understanding of autonomous vehicles, that it is not just the car. We in America have an $800 billion freight industry. And we have wonderful truck drivers. I want to hail out all truck drivers because this is Truck Driver Appreciation Week. But the average age of our truck driver is now in the 50s. And less people are going into this wonderful profession. We need to backfill it with assisted technologies, with an understanding that we might need autonomous vehicles to do those long haul stretches across the country. But we want our goods and we want it now. And we've created greater pressures, both in long haul trucking and in short last mile delivery to your front door. So for the educator who is teaching law, litigators beware, because there'll be a whole industry that will be surrounding the use of autonomous vehicles. If you're a statistician, well, and an economist, you need to start thinking about that paradigm shift in terms of risk, because almost 40,000 people are dying each year on American roadways, and autonomous vehicles has the real ability and the real opportunity as a society to change that. Well, that changes risk. It changes maybe the costs of insurance or who and how we insure. For emergency rooms across America, healthcare will look differently. So what I would say is no matter what field you're in, we're problem solvers. Start thinking about how autonomous vehicles can play into your problem solving.
Oh, so great. That actually touches on, we've gotten a couple questions as people registered and live asking about, how this might impact public transportation or freight. So I think this is actually a great note to kind of end on, where you kind of gave that snapshot of all these different fields. We'll end a little early, give everybody some time back, but thank you so much, Selika, for your time and these insights. We've really enjoyed this conversation as usual. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And to the audience, if you've enjoyed this conversation today, please feel free to check out the rest of our discussions on our website at pavecampaign.org or on our YouTube channel. Next week, we're going to host our third kind of back to school themed conversation, where we're going to discuss 2 Science Center exhibits in Michigan and in London that tried to share information about AVs with the public. Registration for that is open on our website. And thank you all again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.